everyone. Welcome to the 409th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have a stellar show for you today. We're going to be talking about privacy and the president. Also, what you could do with ChatGPT in the smart home. Amazon Sidewalk has a client that we mentioned before, but now it's all official and part of an insurance effort. We're also going to talk about a new wireless standard for the Bluetooth SIG. If you've been listening to the podcast, you're already going to know about it, but now it's official. Qualcomm has a new chip for industrial IoT. CISA has helped hospitals avoid some ransomware attacks, and I'm throwing this in as a good news story on the security front because we don't often have those. We've got a review of the Samsung SmartThings station, not by us, and some updates from Apple and Influx Data. And our guest this week is Jasser Farouk, who is the Senior Vice President of Innovation and Energy Storage at Schneider Electric. That's right, we're going to be talking about smart electrical grids and energy management in the home. Y'all know I love it. And you'll hear from our sponsor, Influx Data. But first, a message from another one of our sponsors, Silicon Labs. Silicon Labs is a leader in secure, intelligent wireless technology, and they have launched their 2023 Tech Talks schedule. This year's Tech Talks include a dedicated technology series for Matter, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and LPWANs, so as to help you build the development skills you need to deliver cutting-edge IoT products. You can join Silicon Labs experts and industry leaders for these one-hour virtual trainings created for developers by developers. Tune in, ask questions, and accelerate your device development today. You can register now at scilabs.com. Okay, Kevin, let's talk about privacy. Okay, y'all remember that, I had talked about the cybersecurity label that the White House was pushing and this idea that clearly the government is we've realized that cybersecurity is an issue and we're taking steps to solve it. It's pretty cool because our government doesn't always get together to do these things. So that's all well and good, but I was also a little dismayed because when I talked to people about the cybersecurity label, it felt like privacy would be an essential element. And most of the people working on it on the inside was like, yeah, but the government really wants to avoid dictating what data companies can collect and how they keep it and all of that, and how they communicate that to consumers, because it is a hard issue. So I was bummed, but President Biden is, no, I think this is a big deal and we should have a federal privacy law. He actually first started talking about this in a Wall Street Journal opinion article, and then he mentioned it last night in the State of the Union. And I was really excited about this. Here's what Biden said in the State of the Union. We must finally hold social media companies accountable for the experimenting they're doing on children for profit. It is time to pass bipartisan legislation to stop big tech from collecting personal data on our kids and teenagers online, ban targeted advertising to children, and impose stricter limits on the personal data that companies collect on all of us. Save the children!
So this was a very smart approach on his part, because instead of having this all-encompassing approach of we must impose data privacy laws and all these limits and so on and so forth. And that's obviously going to be debatable depending on your beliefs, so on and so forth. But when you target the approach specifically to children, it's really hard to argue against it. Everybody, not everybody, but most everybody would generally support what he's thinking here. So it's a foot in the door to get started, because so far it's been a non-starter.
Exactly. And I feel like this could be good, one, because I feel like social media is probably the big target here, but he did mention targeted advertising. This is my hope, because there's nothing specific in here about smart home, but children live in smart homes and their data gets scooped up already. And I think it's worth pointing that out and hopefully getting better rules around transparency and privacy related to that, kind of tied to any of this legislation. Because if a child is talking to Madam A and demanding certain content, that is getting scooped up into a profile, right? Mm-hmm. So, and an easy way to solve this is family data. So I would look for something like that, because I think it also ties into the fact that these are our homes. These are very private places. So I don't know if this is going to lead anywhere, but I am really happy about it, because we have long been like in this era of, oh, industries can regulate themselves. And as we saw with cybersecurity, that's just not the case. And these are big issues. We'll see.
He didn't mention any companies by name.
No.
I can understand that, either in his opinion piece nor in the State of the Union. But my hope is when he says, quote unquote, big tech, I hope he's including ISPs, internet service providers. This just came up on social media yesterday where I'm on Mastodon and somebody was saying, how is it that on 2 different devices in my house, I search for one thing or in an app, and then on my other device, it's on the same network, but I'm getting ads for that thing, like within 5 minutes. And I responded, I said, I can't tell you for certain, but I'm 99% sure that whatever ISP you use is creating a profile or selling metadata on your searches. So it doesn't matter that you're using individual devices because the household itself is profiled. So anybody in the household, that data is being gathered and swept up into these targeted ads and so forth. And smart home devices are obviously, we want privacy and protection there, but kids today are also online on so many other devices, and it's just there for the ISP to take unless you're using a VPN, which I would presume most people are not.
There's 2 ways to do this. You can use a VPN. Great. Does come with some drawbacks. But you could also stop using the DNS provided by your ISP. So you could go with an independent DNS provider. Google has one.
Yes, exactly. Big tech.
I'm like, Google has one. Cloudflare also has another one. So that's another way to get around some of this.
I actually do use a VPN at home.
Really?
I do.
Does it affect your sports and kind of...
There are some certain streaming applications or services that say you're on a VPN, you can't be. In those cases, I just flip a switch, but by and large, I just deal with it as it comes up. It actually helps me because they have points of presence all around the world, so I can often pretend to be, say, in England to watch a Premier League match that isn't being broadcast here. So
nefarious.
Yeah.
And how much do you pay for your VPN?
I believe it's $50 a year. I have it in a plan where I also have encrypted email services. It's all through Proton Mail, and then I have their Proton VPN as part of that.
Excellent. I'm just asking in case people are like, wait, Kevin. Oh, and wait, Kevin, where are you on Mastodon if people want to find you?
I hide behind the name Kevin C. Toffel, all one word, at Hachyderm, HACHYDERM.io.
Yay!
So it's a server that really is for open source and developer type people. You can join any server, but you can find me
there.
Yeah, I'm everywhere.
You're not on Twitter anymore. Not really.
Not really. No, haven't been since November.
All right, let's talk about ChatGPT, or as I like to call it, Chat. I don't know why. It's more fun. Okay, y'all, I feel like I shouldn't have to tell you what ChatGPT is because most of our audience is probably already playing around with it in a bunch of different ways. But this is
it's a language learning model that they were using.
Yes. OpenAI launched this language learning model that now takes in content and spits words, written language back at you. You can ask them things. It'll deliver songs in the style of the Rolling Stones, or,
I've asked it about me, and it tells me using information it's gathered over the internet. It's mostly accurate. It didn't know how old I was. I've also asked it to write a 500-word blog post, not for you.
Thanks.
For my Chromebook site. Not that I published it, but I'm like, write a 500-word blog post about, in the style of Kevin C. Toffel, on why Chromebooks are good for most people, blah, blah, blah. And I'd say 95% of it is accurate information, or was accurate information. And it definitely used the way I write to create the blog post. And it did this in all of about 5 seconds. And what's interesting is it's responsive in that, for another example, I told it to write some small JavaScript code to do something, and it was actually incorrect when I ran the code. I went back and said, why am I getting this answer? I should be getting that answer. It immediately says, I'm sorry, that code is not correct. Let me address that. And then again, in 3 seconds, it says, this should resolve the problem. And it did. It figures things out by putting more information into what it's trying to do at the time via context and what it has learned from the internet.
Yes. I was actually reading something from Stephen Wolfram, who created Wolfram Alpha. He did a whole thing where he tied Wolfram Alpha in with ChatGPT to basically make it understand math. Which was fun. All right, but that has nothing to do with the smart home, and this is what we're about. So the folks at Josh.ai, which is an alternative voice assistant service, it is a kind of one of the Cydia style ones, so it's for professional installers, and it's a really good service. I really like Josh AI. They've been experimenting with ChatGPT, and we'll link to a YouTube video they popped up that basically has someone asking the Josh.ai assistant for all kinds of things like weather and whether or not like a good restaurant in a certain area. And they said they did do some editing on the video to make it ChatGPT can be slow to respond. So from a voice perspective, it is super fast if you think about what it's doing, but it is like if you're anticipating talking to someone back and forth, like a normal conversation.
Plus the service has a lot of use right now. Like I'm trying right now and it's just telling me we are experiencing exceptionally long wait times and such. So yeah, it's not like around the world zippity-doo-dah fast.
Yeah, but the video is fun and they show a lot of different ways that ChatGPT could be used to make your smart home and your voice assistant specifically much more useful and interactive because it will understand your spoken language, what you're asking for. And it's not going to do it in the style of Madam A or in the style of Siri. Although that'd be fun. But it will give you a lot of information in kind of a fun format or a intelligible format, which is nice. So I was excited about that. The other thing I will note, because I was on the Home Assistant blog just checking things out, and they put a note up late last month saying, hey, we're not actually going to allow ChatGPT to answer questions in the forums because it's not accurate. So that is a thing to know when you're talking to ChatGPT via Josh.ai, which again, all of these are just, they're not out in the real world yet. They're not even betas. Prototyping. Thank you. I was like, what is that word? Home Assistant's basically saying, look, we get it. You want to help people, but a lot of times these systems are still wrong, and they're wrong in subtle ways that only really experts could detect. So if you don't know something, don't ask ChatGPT and just pop it in there.
Right. Anybody could do that rather than posting on a forum. They could just, if that's the information they want and they trust it. Part of the problem is the data that it's been trained on only goes up to 2021. So in Home Assistant's case, software updates, hardware changes, new supports for different protocols, it may not know that, or the process has changed to fix something with Home Assistant. Yeah, I wouldn't rely on it for anything either. It reminds me, developers will be familiar with Stack Overflow, the website where people ask developer questions. What's the quickest way to find out something from a development standpoint? Go to the second or third answer on Stack Overflow because usually the first one is dead wrong. No, really, it's true. And it's true. And that's why I don't post answers there unless I'm 100% certain of something.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I'm always
helping anybody if I'm not, right?
Sometimes even here, I get a little, if I haven't done it myself, I'm like, oh, I hate this. Okay. We're going to move on. So that's the ChatGPT in the smart home. Could be fun for your voice assistant. All right. Next up, Amazon. We had talked about this. So there's a company called Meshify, and they are owned by HSB, which is Hartford Steam Boiler. It's an insurance firm, is what you need to know. It's Hartford Steam Boiler. It's part of Munich Re. It's a cyber risk and insurance company, and they own this sensor company called Meshify, and as part of their applied technology solutions, the goal is that eventually one day you could use Meshify sensors in people's homes and help lower insurance premiums, perhaps help detect things before they become expensive, catastrophic claims, that sort of thing. So we talk a lot about insurance in the smart home here. It's been a little iffy. There are a couple issues. One issue is, how do you know if someone has the sensors and stuff that you've paid them to get connected? How do you get the data off of them if they don't want to share it? That sort of thing. Because usually what happens is I just bought all this. And they're like, okay, great. Here's a discount on your premium. And then they don't really know if the person's using it. But Meshify is going to work with Amazon Sidewalk to have a line of connected smart sensors that will go to anybody. And this is cool because with Amazon's Sidewalk network, which is a low power, wide area network, the homeowner might install these sensors and keep it operational, but Meshify could do it too, or HSB, or your insurance company who sends them out to you, because it would just connect to the existing Amazon Sidewalk network in the home. So I think this is really compelling.
I am feeling the opposite.
Okay.
Well, okay. So here's how I think about it. Who is your customer here? And what network connectivity do they already have? And how hard is it to get devices onto that network?
Well, this would make it easy to get the devices onto the network. I've talked to people who are talking about using like just a QR code to pop it onto the Sidewalk network. Here's the thing. For insurance, I think this is pretty interesting because I want a leak in my house, my insurance, we're all on the same side there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like I have no issues with a water monitoring device that my insurance company wants to put in my home. Now, if my utility wants to put it in my home and then will enforce like water restrictions, that's a little different. And I'll be honest, I don't know, like maybe the utility does a deal with my insurance company once these are widespread and then tries to cut down on that. That is something like, this is why we need laws around data privacy and ownership,
right,
and what you can do with it. But right now, my water monitoring system, it went offline because my housekeepers unplugged it. And I got a text and they're like, okay, you got to put it back online. And I'm like, okay, I'll get to that eventually. But what if right now, while it's offline, I had a leak? Or maybe I forgot about it or got unplugged while I was on vacation. Or so
if the sensor, whether it's a Meshify sensor or whatever sensor you're using, if it's unplugged, it's not going to work no matter what.
Well, a Meshify sensor would have a battery because Sidewalk is a low power network.
Okay. So if you want to have that, I wouldn't call it redundancy, I'd call it guaranteed power. I'm not saying Sidewalk's a bad thing at all by any means. It's just, this does not seem to be a compelling product for Sidewalk to me, because I would think any business or any consumer, except maybe in a very remote area, has the existing coverage that they can just use with.
Oh no, like right now, like what if with the power's out, it's freezing cold, your pipes are freezing. If the power's out, there's not a lot you can do for your freezing pipes.
Right.
Then you wouldn't have internet access. Sporadic small outages, because if the whole area is out, then your lower goes down.
Exactly. Yeah, there's benefits. I just don't know if there's enough benefits. This is going to move the needle. I hope it does. Again, I'm not anti-Sidewalk. It's just I don't feel like this is a product that.
It also, because Sidewalk connectivity is free, you just pop it. It's free. It's basically a gateway into AWS. So you don't pay for the connectivity. So you're also being able to offer these sensors at a pretty low cost for your customers.
Yep. I don't disagree with that, but I'm already paying for my connectivity. There's no add-on to pay for connectivity if I don't use LoRaWAN sensors. I use other sensors.
The company that's offering them doesn't have to factor in the connectivity costs. So they can offer, they basically say, here's a $20 sensor. You don't have to worry about subscriptions, and I don't have to pad that with extra money to offset the connectivity costs over the next 5 years.
Do you pay connectivity fees for the sensor you have on your home network now?
The company that makes it does, and they add that fee when they price the sensor to me.
Your water sensor company is paying a fee for the connectivity?
Okay, no, that's a Wi-Fi network.
That's where I'm going.
Sorry, for an LP WAN or for like cellular connectivity, they would. And that's where these things come into play.
Gotcha.
I think.
I would agree. And I don't think if this is a consumer play, I don't think every consumer already.
It's consumer and business.
But even businesses have connectivity or they wouldn't be in business. So I hear you.
Right. If your power goes out, the Sidewalk network still provides connectivity, or if your internet goes out, by using other nearby available networks.
It is a more robust network. I would agree, or it can be, yes.
Okay. And you can deploy these sensors in places where there isn't Wi-Fi. So if you're monitoring water pipes in the basement, but
that
it's
makes
got
sense
a crappy
to me.
connection,
yes.
Plus who wants to put in a battery-powered sensor with Wi-Fi? No one. I know Wi-Fi Halo is trying to change that, y'all, but I don't know if it's going to get there. Okay. Let's talk about other low-power connectivity standards. This time, those that don't go as far. Bluetooth. The Bluetooth SIG has introduced a new wireless standard. Yay, this is a big deal. And if you've been listening, you already know what it's going to be. It's going to be for electronic shelf labels.
Yay.
These are basically tiny little, they're usually like
e-ink or
e-ink. Yeah, they're usually e-ink devices that will just change the price wirelessly now over Bluetooth. And you're going to be able to like a retail company is going to be able to change pricing on the shelves however often they want, basically.
Yeah, I love e-ink as a solution for these in general. And Bluetooth obviously makes sense because you don't need super high power or super network coverage, so to speak. But e-ink devices, for people who don't know, they only use power when the screen is changed.
Right.
Once it's displaying what you want it to display, it just does not use any more power until you update the display with, say, a new price. And it's a smidgen of energy to do that.
It's the automated equivalent of those like church signs that are done by hand.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yes.
So the other thing that we're seeing here, and this is what we've written about, is there's this like little ecosystem building around this. So the e-ink devices, the e-ink shelf tags, they're going to have Bluetooth. And then the Bluetooth is going to be low power automatically, but there's also going to be some sort of over-the-air wireless charging element. So we see companies like
Wiliot, maybe?
Wiliot provides the semiconductor inside the tag. Because Wiliot does a really awesome low power Bluetooth / energy harvesting device. So there may be a battery in there, but there may just be like a little, in the case of Energous, generating power from the actual wireless signals that are being transmitted.
Mm-hmm.
It might be a solar panel, like a tiny little solar panel, like a PV. So there's all that happening. So basically what we're going to see is this like crazy number of electronic shelf labels. Imagine every paper label that you see on your grocery store shelf is suddenly a Bluetooth enabled e-ink device. And throughout the store, there's going to be these wireless power transmitters, just like there are like wireless access points. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And the standardization is going to help because then you won't have to worry about like buying a Wiliot tag to go with Energous or an Atmosic tag there's going to be a standard for all that. So that will make it super awesome. And yeah, I'm excited. Okay. Qualcomm has introduced the world's first 5G NR Lite modem. Y'all are like, what?
Yeah,
no,
what?
Stacy, stop. Don't. Here's what's happening. So they've basically got a new modem chip. So this is a radio, and it's going to be the latest version of the 5G standard. So it's got a couple things that are important here. First off, it's got a bunch of things designed for using 5G without consuming a lot of power, which is good for, I was going to say X-ray vision, but it's actually AR. So this is going to have more capacity, but lower power. So it's not like an NB-IoT device, but NR Lite devices are a step up in between there in a traditional 5G modem. The other place it's going to be interesting is for industrial IoT. So you could put this on sensors in the industrial setting and basically allow them to communicate with other 5G devices, but without absorbing all this. It's basically so you're not strapping like a boat motor onto a drone. You're snapping now an appropriately sized drone motor. That was maybe a terrible analogy. I don't know. But it's also going to support one of the cool things that is part of this like latest release of LTE is that it's going to have super precise positioning. And so again, that's something big in industrial. When I talked to John Deere about what they were looking for in their 5G deployment coming up this year, precise positioning was part of that because they want to know like, where is that tool specifically in these ginormous factory settings? So this is the XR35 and the XR32 are the new modems. They're going to start shipping in the first half of this year, and we'll see commercial devices in the first half of next year, which means if you are an industrial player, you're going to see probably these being in use in 2024. John Deere, I'm sorry. I know you wanted to have your 5G deployment this year, but maybe not. And if you are excited about like AR spectacles, you're going to be that again next year that you'll be able to buy those.
I would think these companies will at least be sampling these to prepare for 2024.
Oh yeah, they totally are. They're sampling happening in the first half of this year.
Yeah. Okay.
Which means, okay, maybe John Deere can actually want, but it won't be at scale. It'll still be prototyping. All right. Next up, CISA. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency said that they had helped hospitals resolve a bunch of DDoS incidents this week that were launched by a hacking group. Only reason this is in here, this is the KillNet KillNet is the hacking group, and they were launching these attacks, and the idea was that they will take critical infrastructure offline and also get money.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a traditional thing. This isn't exactly an IoT story, but I brought it up because I wanted y'all to know that this is a great example of how our increased focus in the last few years on pushing for cybersecurity resources and regulations has helped stop some incidences. So we're chopping off all the low-hanging fruit higher now.
It's also good that it's in the hospital sector where we've talked many times about older connected devices and insecurity there and so on. There's enough exploits out there, but a DDoS attack could obviously affect medical care.
Yeah, even if someone's IT network goes offline at a hospital, that can really stymie both the ability to schedule surgeries or take care of patients quickly. And it can also have an effect on things like your MRI machine. So people do shut down hospitals or slow them because of these attacks. All right.
That's why I stay out of hospitals.
There you go. The hospital near me, actually, for 3 weeks, they were doing paper records because of an attack.
Wow.
Yeah. My hospitals are terrible. Okay. I'm like, I cannot get old in this place because it will be bad. All right. Let's talk about the Samsung SmartThings Station, the surprise hub they launched at CES, and the surprise way that Samsung SmartThings, after getting out of the hardware business, got right back into it.
And we still don't know why.
Especially when we look at what the SmartThings Station has in it.
True.
So this is a review from The Verge. We'll actually get one of these because I'm playing with SmartThings and I have it running in my home. I don't love it, I'll be honest, but we'll do that too. But Kevin, why don't you talk about this?
Yeah, so we mentioned this because it was debuted at CES. So while we were out there, I think on the podcast, we did talk about it. For those who missed it, it's a small little box about the size of, I'd say, like an Apple TV. It's $60. It is a SmartThings hub. It's also a wireless charger, so you can put your phone on top of it. It is a Matter controller and a Thread border router. While it does work with both iOS and Android, it's really optimized for Samsung devices, which is typical Samsung. For example, it is a fast charging device if you have a Galaxy phone, but for any other phone, it's a slow charging device, basically. There is no Z-Wave in it, and that's setting some people off because the Samsung SmartThings hubs had Z-Wave support. So people are saying, I'm not ripping out all my Z-Wave switches, but okay, then you're just not moving to Matter, and that's fine. That's your choice. It's not for those people. It's for people who are in the Samsung ecosystem and want to have a Thread border router and a Matter controller.
So I think it's a compelling option for people who want to get into the smart home now that Matter's out. And I think that's probably why Samsung made it, because the AOTech hub, which is the other SmartThings hub, does have Zigbee and Z-Wave in it. And it will right now act as a bridge for Matter. So if I bring Matter into my home, it will control all my Z-Wave devices for me through that hub. But that is complicated. And so maybe Samsung asked AOTech, and AOTech, which makes a lot of Z-Wave devices, was like, no, I really want it to have all of these other radios, which is overkill, maybe. So maybe SmartThings was like, we'll do this cheap little device that does Thread and Wi-Fi and make it a smart home hub for people who don't need all that extra fanciness.
Yeah, and it is reasonably priced. It's a good starting point if you don't have a Matter controller or Thread hub. Yes, you could do it with some less expensive smart speaker. This has some other additional features such as the wireless charging and a programmable button on the hub that you can, I believe, have up to 3 different scenes programmed, and you tap the button once, twice, 3 times, and you have your different scenes run. But I have no problem with the buttons, but that's a button that's tied to the device as opposed to a button I can place somewhere around my house. So I don't see much value in that, but that's just me.
Because it has the charging function, I feel like you would put it in, most of my hubs are like not in out of the way places, but they're not like
on the
place
nightstand,
of pride, like on the nightstand or on the, kitchen counter where you can access it. But with something like this, it would probably be in a place where you're likely to hang out and put your phone while it charges for a little bit. I still don't think it's awesome, but I'm like, I could see why it would do that.
Yep, that's fair.
And I love buttons. I'm never going to complain about buttons. If I can press a button, I will.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically we'll play with this and we'll see if it is something that would make sense to give your grandma or your dad for creating a smart home network. I think for a new Matter controller, because it is super cheap and it also will charge your Galaxy devices, but not your Galaxy smartwatch. Okay, moving right along. What is happening with Apple and the HomeKit update?
So we talked about this last week because I mentioned how in a rare situation, Apple really hosed up the HomeKit architecture in preparation, I presume, for Matter 1 or 2 software releases ago. They pulled that update when enough people said this is breaking things, and unfortunately I installed it and I can't go back. So I'm waiting for them to re-release their new HomeKit architecture software update. Last week we had seen code for iOS 16.3 that was indicating the new architecture would be in 16.3. I got 16.3 iOS. Today, it's not there, and it looks like 16.4. So if you were waiting because of what we said last week for this update, you are still waiting, as am I.
Sorry, Kevin.
That's okay.
Other small news bits. Influx Data, which is a sponsor of the show, announced that they have raised $81 million for their time series database. As I always say when I mention time series databases, these are the database for the IoT in the sense that a lot of sensor data is time series data. It's like, at this time, the temperature was this, or at this time, the door was open.
Like down to the microsecond.
Yeah. These aren't complex databases. These aren't like relational databases. But what happens is, as connectivity and power and a lot of these issues where you're like, you can wake up a sensor and have it sending more data, you can actually do this down to the nanosecond or microsecond, which means you get a lot of time series data. And when you deal with that, you've got to be like, what's the most important? Because you can't process in real time a lot of this. And a lot of this does need to be processed in relative real time. If you get an alert that the temperature is too high in a fridge, you can't get that an hour later. You need that now. So that's what they do. And the funding is basically $30 million in debt and $51 million in equity. And the idea here is they're going to use this to make it to profitability the next 2 years. I asked if they were going to use this to go public. It's very popular, but Evan Kaplan, the CEO, was like, given what's happening in the economy right now, that's not what we're after. I also asked if they were going to make any acquisitions because we're going to see a lot of companies struggle to raise money and have to be sold. And we don't have anything that they need right now, but they are going to keep their eyes open because, there's going to be a lot of fruit that fell off the tree. It's no longer low hanging. It's falling off the tree and we should pick it up before it rots. That was my metaphor, not Evan Kaplan's metaphor. He's probably way more eloquent. He is way more eloquent. Anyway, so that is that story. And I think that concludes this segment of the show. But it is now time for the Internet of Things podcast hotline, which is the segment of the show where we talk to you. This week's hotline sponsor is Akenza. Create amazing IoT solutions with the Akenza low-code IoT platform. You can try it for free today at akenza.io. That's AKENZA.io. And if you would like to call us and have us answer your questions, you can call us at 512-623-7424. And who knows? You may get an answer to your question, but you will definitely be entered to win our February prize, which is Samsung SmartThings Station. That's right. We're going to send you this thing we just talked about, and maybe you can use it to set up a true Matter controller. You can add like a $20 Meros or TP-Link's smart plug rather to that, and poof, you're playing with Matter. Woo! So that's your prize for the month of February. Now it's time to hear this week's question. This week's voicemail is from Thomas, and it's a good one. Let's hear it.
Hi, Stacy. This is Thomas Munn. My question is, are there any really good whole house electricity monitoring? I'm more of a Linux person, so I'd like something that's a little more open source and not Windows centric. I'm trying to determine all my household usage, not just for one plug, but for the entire house and for every single breaker that I have. I have a breaker box, and I wanted to know if there's a way to individually monitor all the breaker systems. Thank you.
Oh, Thomas, this is a great question. Probably, I'm going to say 80% because I actually think I was going to say 90%, but there's more of y'all out there. Most people are not going to want to do this. This is a very small group of people that are going to want to use open source whole home energy monitoring. And I get it. I get why you want to have control over this. So we are answering your questions. But for those of y'all who are like, ooh, that sounds interesting, especially after you hear Stacey's guest, let me just recommend not doing this unless you're someone like Kevin or me and you're prepared to wire things up and have things do some coding and possibly break some things a little bit.
It shouldn't be too bad because honestly, when we first heard the question, I was like, oh, open source, you're going to have to roll your own solution here. But then we quickly said, wait, Home Assistant is open source. And we looked into energy management there. And I think it was back in 2021 that they started adding home energy data to the dashboard. So then it was just a matter of getting device support. And they have a couple of example projects where they're using energy monitoring relays and such, getting the data in and showing it in real time on your Home Assistant dashboard.
And so we reached out to Paulus Schautzen. I am totally butchering that name. It is very difficult to say. And he is one of the co-creators and founders of Home Assistant.
I believe so.
These open source projects. He's a great dude. But we reached out to him and I was like, hey, we've got this whole question going on. And he's, oh, I got you, Stacey. And he really does. So they actually have a full-on demo. We'll link to that. And it will track all kinds of stuff, whole home energy usage, solar generation, battery storage. It also shows like a solar forecast and data about what is using electricity in your home and how your utility is generating electricity. So if you really want to optimize for using only renewables, you could actually do that for some of them. If they make it available, HomeKit can pull that in. So
from a solution standpoint, like a hardware standpoint, like a not open source example would be like the Sense clamps and switches or relays that gather data. That's I'll call it a plug and play approach.
Our guest, again, is from Schneider Electric, and he's talking about the new stuff that they launched at CES. And that stuff, now Schneider has said that they will have APIs available, but that requires integration from another vendor.
Right.
And if that vendor chooses not to, then it's not going to happen.
So if you do want to go the Home Assistant route, which keeps it open source, two hardware options that you could consider. One is from Shelly. It's their 3EM. And I think you use clamps that go around your mains, electric mains, and that determines how much electricity is coming into the house, but it can also be hooked up to a few individual circuits in your panel. That would work, but it's going to be limited to just a few circuits. So another solution, and I'm actually thinking of trying this, to be honest, is from IoT a Watt, or maybe it's IOTA Watt, but the I and the T are capitalized. So IoTAWATT.com. For anywhere from $150 to $200, you can get those clamps for the mains, but they also have a box that has leads that can connect to up to 12 circuits in your breaker panel. And that's probably enough for me personally, but you can add a second box and go up to 24 individually monitored circuits. So it's not going to provide energy usage at the individual device level, because you may have multiple devices plugged into a circuit, but at least it gets you all of the devices on that circuit. So I think that's a pretty decent option.
So you could do that for your big circuits, and then you have your smart plugs that also offer energy monitoring, and you could tie those in if you wanted to. So you could actually do the circuits where you've got your electric vehicle charger, your washer, your dryer, your induction stove, your refrigerator. Then you just take your outlets. You could even replace your outlets with a Home Assistant compatible smart outlet, like not an actual plug, but like the full-on outlet. Like Shelly will let you do a module that you could put in there.
And that'll get you more granular information at that point. And the beauty of all of this is The solutions that we just talked about from a hardware perspective, there are already integrations into Home Assistant here. So
you don't have to write them yourself.
you don't have to write them yourself. Exactly. You can even see what types of data you're going to get just by looking at the code. It's freely available on the Home Assistant site. So you'll know in advance before even buying any hardware, what information is this going to give me and how can I massage that data on my dashboard to make it look like the way I want it to look. Again, it would be open source then. You wouldn't be reliant upon a proprietary operating system because these all run Linux. Home Assistant would run on either a Home Assistant piece of hardware, which is similar to a Raspberry Pi, or you can just use a Raspberry Pi for Home Assistant because it's a free download. So
exactly. What are you running your Home Assistant on?
I've been running it on a Raspberry Pi. I think a Model 3 Plus.
Got it.
Yeah.
I know you don't all the time, but
I do not.
You do.
Because I don't like to mess around too much with the environment because of my family. It's cranky when I do that.
Yeah, man. But how did you find it when you were using Assistant?
I found it really good. I don't think I've reviewed it in the past year and a half just to see what's new. So maybe it's time to buy one of these, either the Shelly product or the IoT Watts, and
put it back together.
Home Assistant updated on the Raspberry Pi and do another review and talk about the energy management.
Yeah, I'm down. As someone who's not doing it, don't wire hot. Okay, so thanks, Thomas, for sending in an excellent question. I hope we helped you. If you do try any of this, let us know. And if Kevin tries, he'll obviously let y'all know. If you would like to give us a call and have us answer your question, you can reach us at 512-623-7424. And that concludes this segment of the show, but please stay tuned for our guest, Jasser Farouk from Schneider Electric. We're going to be talking about why we need a smarter grid and smarter electricity management within the home. But before that, we're going to hear from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Influx Data. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. And this week's sponsor is InfluxDB, and I have Brian Mullen, who is the Chief Marketing Officer. To get started, can you just tell us what is InfluxDB?
InfluxDB is a time series data platform where developers build real-time IoT, analytics, and cloud applications. The way that we think about time series, what it is it's really data that is just stamped in time in some way. And that could be, every nanosecond, every 1 second, every 10 seconds, every 10 minutes. InfluxDB simplifies time series data management. Developers can ingest, store, and analyze all types of time series data in a purpose-built platform, one that's designed to handle high-speed and high-volume data ingest and real-time analysis.
Why does a purposely built time series platform matter to IoT folks?
So in IoT, really all data is time series data. This is data that's coming from the sensors and systems and applications. And so as enterprises build and adopt new IoT systems and applications, often they're facing this overwhelming, massive volume of time series data coming from all these devices and sensors. And that's where a purposely built platform like InfluxDB comes into place. Organizations and developers don't have to spend time and money managing a big data store or worry about data loss. Instead, with a purposely built platform, they can easily run and grow that large data workload and not worry about the high volumes that it's generating. And what they can do instead is actually focus on leveraging that data, converting that into some sort of change, optimizing production, increasing their market share if that's helpful.
So you guys recently launched IOX, which is a new high-performance time series engine. Can you tell me a little bit more about that product?
Sure. So we just launched our new database and storage engine, which has been known as IOX in our cloud product. And so now InfluxDB Cloud is powered by IOX. This is a new core of the product, and this update delivers high-volume ingestion, unbounded cardinality, which is the number of time series you can handle in the platform, and now an order of magnitude faster queries. And the new architecture is designed to really improve performance, scalability, but also resilience in the product.
Why is IOX such a game changer for people developing IoT apps?
Yeah, so it addresses several key technical challenges that developers often face with IoT. And the first is high cardinality data, where there are many distinct values in the tags, also known as attributes in the data. And what the new engine does is it eliminates this limit on the amount of high cardinality data you can have. So in other words, you can collect, store, and analyze data from literally billions of data sources and devices without constraint. And we also have a compressed in-memory data store. So you can run blazing fast analytics queries over these large workloads of data. Finally, we have low-cost cloud object storage. Therefore, there's no need to archive, discard, or downsample data. And it's ideal for working with historical data or doing predictive maintenance.
Okay, and where can our listeners go to find out more about InfluxDB?
The first thing to do is to try the product. And you can do that by going to our website, influxdata.com.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Jasser Farouk, who is the SVP of Innovation in the Home Electrification Unit of Schneider Electric. Hello, Jasser. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Stacey. Great to be on with you.
I am really glad you're here because obviously I feel like a big story at CES was smarter energy. It's a topic we've been talking about for probably the last few years on the show. And y'all at Schneider launched several products. I'll give you a chance. Why don't you tell me what y'all launched at CES?
Wonderful. Yeah. So at CES, we announced the Schneider Home Energy Management System, which really it comprises of a few different components. It starts with a home battery for clean energy storage, a high power solar inverter, a smart electrical panel, an electric vehicle charger, and a suite of connected electrical sockets and light switches. And they're all controlled by the really easy to use Schneider Home app.
Got it. Okay. And this is part of a trend that we've been talking about. So this is actually something we've been talking about for several years on the show, which is the idea that our energy grid needs to be a little bit more responsive, maybe look a little bit more like the internet, and not just for like demand response where a utility turns down your thermostat during high demand periods, but something that's a little less of a blunt tool. I talk about the three trends driving this, and they are, a need for resilience in the face of climate change, the unreliability of generation when it comes to things like renewables, like the sun stops shining in the winter at like 4:00, but we all come home and we need to turn everything on and that sort of thing. And then also an increased need for electrification to help with our carbon footprints. So as we add more induction stoves, electric cars to our homes, we're putting some severe stress on the existing wiring within our homes and also the demand from the grid overall. So all of those things are coming together and they're creating a need for energy management, energy storage. Am I forgetting something, Jasser?
No, I think the trends you explained, Stacey, are spot on. So I wouldn't say you've forgotten anything, and I'd love to dive into some of those topics with you.
Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about electrification? Because I know that like about a year ago, we added a hot tub and all of a sudden I was like, holy cow, I need more electricity from my panel box than I possibly have. And I feel like a lot of people are going to be coming up against that soon.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that, we've always treated electrons as this thing that like we have an abundance of. I think, many folks are used to the idea of scarcity. We're often running against budgets, financial scarcity, and, sometimes we saw large spikes in gasoline prices recently, and, we've been through supply shortages and folks are waiting a long time for electronics to get shipped to their home. But I think electricity has always been this thing that I think, especially in North America, that we've assumed is in abundance. And this specific use case you mentioned, where as soon as many customers are opting to get a device that's pulling a lot of power, all of a sudden they're like, wait, there's like other things that need to happen for me to be able to enjoy this, whatever this device was, whether it's a hot tub or maybe it's an EV, maybe it's getting, solar panels or a battery added to their home. All of a sudden they run into there's all sorts of other constraints that we might hit. Like you mentioned, my electrical panel may not have enough space in it, and therefore I might need to upgrade to a larger electrical panel. And then also even the utility service that's coming into my house isn't sufficient to power what this new device that I just got. So the utility may need to come and make upgrades around my home to be able to get me this now scarce resource that I need. And then on top of that, the other sort of other way to think about scarcity is when we're now in a situation where we have more extreme weather events due to climate change. Sometimes, we're entire areas have power that's in short supply, and we're seeing that with various different power shutoffs that's happening from utilities. So, all of a sudden, electricity is becoming this thing that's becoming increasingly scarce. And when we face that scarcity, there's lots of ways to address it. One way is just to add more. So add more, supply of electrons and potentially, add more generation. And there's things that can do that, like solar panels and ideally we want to do that in a renewable way. So we're doing renewable capacity additions to the grid, whether that's on your customer's rooftop or that's in front of the meter on a utilities grid. But then the other thing that I think we can do is to add intelligence to solve this problem. So, is there a way to match the supply of demand better so that energy doesn't feel as scarce? So I think this idea of electrification is super fascinating. It's not just about adding more electrons, but it certainly is also about adding intelligence to reduce this like what is becoming an increasing feeling of scarcity around power.
I agree with you. And I like that, this concept of it as being a scarce resource. What is driving the interest, and what do you think will be the reasons for this change to get people to actually adopt this and not just talk about it?
I think one really specific reason will be the adoption of electric vehicles. As more and more customers purchase an EV or purchase maybe even their second EV, all of a sudden they may realize that their electrical system at home or potentially like on their street isn't ready to accept or charge that car. I think for an average customer, this may not be on your mind if you're thinking about an EV purchase. And it's possible that, when the time comes to get a charger, you may get a notification from your utility saying, hey, we may need to come and upgrade your electrical service at your home from, say, 100 amps to 200 amps or 200 amps to 400 amps. But for you as an average customer, it might just mean an upgrade of a couple of $1,000s at least. And there are alternatives to paying that. One thing that you could do is add some intelligence in your home, like, for example, with our Pulse Smart Panel and our Charge EV charger that says, maybe when my car is charging, I can turn off some of my other loads that maybe aren't as critical, or like maybe I don't need the hot tub running at the same time that the car is charging, or vice versa. We can ramp down the rate, the speed at which your car is charging. Maybe it charges at 50% of the charge rate instead of 100%, so that we can keep you below the original service limit of your original panel, so you can avoid some of those costly utility upgrades. Scenarios like this are going to become increasingly common, we think, for customers as they go on this transition towards more and more electrification.
Agreed. So let's talk about what needs to take place to add this intelligence. You've mentioned, I think, things that are very home centric right now, like charging my EV at half the rate while my hot tub is heating up or whatnot. So what needs to happen on the utilities side, if anything, to help make a better grid, a more reliable grid, and better use what is kind of a scarce resource?
One thing that on the utility side that absolutely will help is just increased communication between all the various different nodes of the grid. We sort of have a one-way flow of communication right now, and that's sort of how the grid was originally designed, but have this increasing number of electrons that are being generated at what was traditionally been like the end of the grid. If you think about the start of the grid as being where the electrons are produced, which is like power plants, as that being the start of the grid, and the end of the grid being those electrons moving from those power plants into cities generally, and then into like neighborhoods, that would then be the end of the grid. And that's kind of how communication flows have also followed that model. But now we're generating electrons, through rooftop solar. We may have a bidirectional flow of power. We may store power in our residential home batteries, or increasingly into our electric vehicles as well, and then have that power get reinjected back into the grid from our homes or from our businesses. So it's going back into the grid in that format. So all of a sudden, it's not the end of the grid anymore. We have this node to node or, bidirectional flow of power. And then we actually, I think one of the critical things that needs to happen is that we need to also increase the communication and the digital assets on all those various different parts of the node to be able to handle that two-way flow of power. And again, just by adding the intelligence at those different nodes, we're able to optimize the use of electricity in a much greater way to potentially offset having to just add more and more power to the grid in sort of an unintelligent way. Can we better manage the electrons that are being flown in both directions?
Got it. And to do this, I feel like real-time pricing might be needed. I feel like we probably should have better discussions with utilities and their customers. I'm thinking about when Texas had a fairly recent heat wave and everybody was like, wait, I'm so uncomfortable in my house. Why is my thermostat taking over my settings and taking over. And they were upset. What needs to happen to make this a little bit more palatable and understandable for consumers?
Yeah, I think real-time pricing would go a long way. I think customers really understanding, getting much better feedback on both when, again, that electricity is scarce, right? So then, if they're paying a lot for electricity when, it's a critical time for the grid, you see things like surge pricing for apps like Uber. There's a similar concept that can be applied here. I really need to run my washing machine at this exact time when, actually the whole grid might be unstable in my area. And I think the way that signal could be easily provided is by just, having customers get a much better sense of their pricing being higher at that moment. We run into the issue that how do we get that information into the customer's hands? Are there apps that we can launch, or text messages that we can send to the customer that say, hey, now is really not a great time for you to be pulling a huge amount of power, that the grid is in at this particular moment. And on the flip side of things, really give customers the feedback to say, well, now's a great time to be charging your EV or, heating up your house because electricity rates have really dropped. But I think a critical part of that is getting that information to customers in an easy or convenient way. Part of what we're building into the Schneider Home app is, at least pulling utility rates as they exist today and surfacing that information to customers so at least they can see, if they're on a time of use rate, for example, between the hours of 6 a.m. and noon, this is what my electricity rate is. And we could make recommendations to them to say, well, here's what we recommend. We're going to turn off, all of your heavy energy consumers in your house using the intelligence that we're building into things like the smart panel, if you're okay with it, and we can surface that recommendation to them. But I think, if you have real-time pricing where, pricing is changing by the second or by the minute, we could really do a lot of optimization within the home or within businesses to really get the right thing for both the energy consumer and the home and the utility to make the grid more stable as well.
Let's talk about that intelligence, because you've mentioned several times where, you're talking about an app surfacing stuff. I think there's probably also some need for built-in intelligence inside the home. So maybe I'll be like, hey, I always want to prioritize. I'd like to prioritize my heating and cooling by 2 degrees and my electric vehicle charging maybe over a 24-hour period. In managing all of that, where do you think that intelligence is going to live, and who will be responsible for surfacing and managing that?
So I think that, this is going to be a multifaceted problem with lots of different folks that are responsible for building in this intelligence. At Schneider Electric, we take digitization and electrification as what some of our key and sustainability as our key pillars of how we do business. So, we certainly believe that we have some role to play here. I think this line of products that we shared is a good example. When we talk about a smart electrical panel, there's kind of 2 ways in which it's smart. One way is, it allows you to remotely control any circuit in your home. So, right now we're used to circuit breakers that basically turn off if there's something dangerous happening, like we exceed, the current that should be flowing through that circuit, and then the circuit breaker turns off. But then, to turn it back on, you got to go into your basement or, into wherever your panel is and manually turn it back on. But, you can imagine a way to remotely do that using an app or through algorithms. That then allows you to have much more control over how your power is flowing through your home. Similarly, we have our line of connected switches and sockets, which means all of your lighting or anything that you plug into an outlet in your home also has the ability to be remotely turned on and off, which is great. So, I think using software and algorithms, we can basically have the ability to control and manage all of the energy in your home. And we touched on this a little bit. One reason you might do that is because you're trying to save money, and we are able to pull in when utility rates are very expensive, and we can optimize your energy consumption in your home to save you money. But, I think there's other reasons to do that as well. Perhaps you want to, if you're stepping away from home for a couple of days or a couple of weeks to go on vacation, maybe you just want your home to power down into something like an away mode or a low power mode, so that maybe there's just one light on upstairs, all of your non-essential devices and appliances in your home turn off. This gives you the added benefit of things like, you didn't leave the stove on or something like that, and all of your lights, are all turned off, so you don't have to manually go do that. So those are some of sort of the more like convenience-related benefits of building this intelligence in, and we certainly think that we have a role to play, and companies like us have a role to play in creating the technology to build this intelligence into the home. Schneider Electric also has a role to play in making the grid itself more intelligent, but it's not just us. I think utilities have a large role to play in terms of creating the roadmap for that increased digitization and increased intelligence to be added onto the grid. We also think that consumers have a role to play as well. Some of this will happen naturally as folks are just trying to solve their own problems around expensive utility rates, or they go through they're buying one of these high-powered devices like an EV or solar or a battery, and then they run into these things as sort of a point of inconvenience on that journey. But instead, I think what we would love to see more of is customers seeing this as an opportunity to make their home more future-proofed, more intelligent, potentially even increase the value of their home as this technology becomes more available and simplified for the customer. So this doesn't become a complicated journey for them to have to piece together lots of different parts of the solution.
That gets to my next question, because while that is simple, I feel like, I live in a 50-year-old house, so I'm probably not in the market to like upgrade everything all at once. It's definitely a more piecemeal thing. Let's talk about the role that you think standards will play in this, because I know like with the Matter smart home device standard, they're talking about like bringing energy in over time. I know y'all are a member of that. Are there some good standards that are going to allow me to use my existing EV charger and have it talk to my breaker box that is made by Schneider? And
yeah, I think I think one thing that we believe is there's going to be various different ways to build this intelligence into the home and onto the grid. If we focus on the home for a second, a sort of very reliable and universal way to create, I use the word intelligence, but really it's ability to turn things on and off, is through either by just literally, turning on and off the power at a socket, an outlet, or at a breaker. So certainly we like that solution because it's going to work in every home. Anything that runs on an electrical outlet, we can turn it on and off using that method, controllable breakers or controllable outlets and switches. But, there's other ways to build that intelligence in. So you can build cloud-to-cloud integrations, through things like Matter is a protocol that would allow cloud-to-cloud integrations across various different vendors. Even within our system, without having the Matter standard, our EV charger is cloud connected to our Pulse panel. So the way that we can dial up and dial down the charge rates is actually through software, because those things are talking to each other digitally. And certainly we would love to see a world where there's increasing software connection between all of our various different energy devices. The more and more that happens, the easier it's going to be to manage all these different energy sources in the home and us to get a more stable and reliable grid. And the Matter standard may have a large role to play in that if energy appliances get added to the Matter protocol. In the short term, we also want to create sort of a bulletproof version of how to do that, just to be able to turn on and off, the electrical circuits and in your home, which also allows you to at least get on-off control, which goes a long way when we're trying to create this, solve some of these problems.
Got it. And let's talk about the time frame for all this, because these are big, significant investments for people. So how do you see this being adopted, and over what period of time?
The increase of electrification solutions, I think, will come fast. We're seeing rapid adoption of electric vehicles in the United States in particular right now. We're seeing significant growth in things like residential batteries as well. Solar has continued to grow at a fairly reasonable pace, although we need to pick that up if we're really going to try and really help mitigate the effects of climate change. So I think that we'll really start to see a lot of momentum on this next wave of home electrification. I would definitely, say in the 2 to 5 year timeframe.
I like it. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Josser. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
And that concludes this week's episode of the Internet of Things podcast. Please join us next Thursday, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you can't get enough IoT news, I would love for you to sign up at www.stacyoniot.com for our weekly IoT newsletter, where we explain all kinds of things that we don't even get to on the show. Once again, thank you for listening, and please subscribe.